Welcome to the show. My name is Alec. It's my channel called White Whale Comics. You already knew that because you're here. How else would you have found me? This is a show that my friend Chris and I started doing a little while ago in order to review Mr. Miracle that we called Comics is Therapy. And we decided to do one not about a specific book, but just about how comics play a role in our day-to-day life and mental health, I guess. We kind of just did the whole show accidentally off air, so we'll see how this goes. Might just have to rehab a conversation that we just had, but it was good stuff, I think, so it'll be worth it. Anyway, please welcome Chris, my co-host for this show. You know him. I got issues 2319 from Instagram. One of the best.
Thank you.
So we got some fine folks in chat already. Comic Books NYC, Perry Comics, 90MF Comics, YouTube is 90. Tina K is here. Just a Little Podcast. Chris Barrett, of course, always. Pope Service the First. Sam's Tangled Web and Sam I Am Comics so far here in the chat.
What's going on, everybody? Thanks for stopping by to enjoy the show. I'm not monitoring the chat because I'm doing this from my cell phone. So Alec's going to be in charge of communicating with you guys. But I do appreciate everybody coming by, and I hope that the show is somewhat entertaining for everyone.
So people are excited to see you. Sam Tangled Web says, "Whoa, got issues." So Tina K.
I've been on a little hiatus from YouTube, so.
Tina says, first two episodes were fantastic. Thank you, Tina. Perry says, I hope to be entertained.
Those were rough.
Yeah.
Those were rough episodes to get through, I think. For
us, hopefully, they were a little less rough for other people. Perry says, I hope to be entertained. I don't know if that's the right word for where this is going, but hopefully it'll be interesting anyway. So my original kind of pitch to Chris about doing this was talking about kind of like how I use comics as like retail therapy, I guess, which is a term that a lot of people use for shopping in general, but and then secondarily to that, also how I use my collection, day to day, the books I have in order to, kind of as, I guess, an antidepressant, for lack of a better term. But we get off on a whole different conversation as well before we went live. So I don't know if you want to just pick up where we were, if you want to kind of give some background, or if you want to just jump right into what I had originally intended.
No, I think we could jump in where you originally intended. I think they kind of go hand in hand, and I think when we get to the point of kind of using comics as a pick me up, I think that'll kind of, follow that path into my train of thought and what I've been going through. So
Pope Service says talking about comics as a salve for the psyche. I think that's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah, it is an interesting way to put it. I think the retail therapy angle, though, is definitely true for a lot of people. Probably almost everyone that's in here right now.
Comic Books NYC says comics are a big stress reliever for me, for sure. I mean, we were kind of talking about how they, in a way, can add to stress as well. But I mean, obviously, if they were more of a stressor than not, I would give them up. But Pope says, forget origin story, jump right in. And Chris Barrett says, so a path to Alec's head. And reading comics, I guess.
Is that?
Yeah, it's weird, right? It's backwards. Oh, you're going into my head. There you go.
Freeze,
Um,
freeze, mother trucker.
Sammy jumped into the chat. Hi, Sammy. So yeah, like it's a weird thing for me buying comics because since I've been down here, I haven't been working much like you. You're kind of in the same boat, and so I have had an excess of free time. And one of the things I've just been doing is just driving to different shops and digging through bins, and that in and of itself could be enough, but I always end up buying stuff, which is counterproductive to not having a job. But at the same time, you get this, I don't know, rush of sensation when you're pulling books out to buy and you bring them to the register and get them home and you rebag them or put them in your collection, whatever. It's all very satisfying, and it all gives you this momentary, at least for me, and you can speak to your thoughts on this, but gives me this momentary relief of stress relief, of escape from anxiety, whatever the case may be. But then it's not lasting. It's not even lingering. As soon as it's over, it's like you get that immediate pop of satisfaction. Then, like, even on the drive home, you're like, damn, well, I just spent $50 or whatever I spent. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think, buyer's remorse is huge. Buyer's remorse is huge in life, right? You buy a car, you buy a house, you buy a pair of sneakers, you buy anything. I think for a lot, you go grocery shopping and you spend too much money. I think everybody has that feeling of, oh crap, like what did I just do? Or, I mean, unless you're made out of money. I know there's some people out there who probably don't feel that way. But I mean, for people that like you and I are on sort of fixed incomes and we have finite bills and we don't have money coming in. And so it's tough to spend money that you don't have because there's no alternating source of income that's going to like fix that for you. But I think comics and retail therapy is that's something that people who have handbag fetishes and who are sneaker fanatics go through the same thing. Is that it's just like a real drug. When you take a real drug, that high never lasts as long after as it did the first time, and every time you take that hit, you get less of a high from it. And for me, I think comics are the same way. I think that I used to buy a book off the wall or a book that was on my list. And I remember when I bought my first copy that I owned of Marvel Spotlight 5, which was like my big book, Ghost Rider. And that was a book that like 3 years ago, I thought that I was never, ever going to own. And when I bought that book, man, I was happy for like weeks. I was really happy for weeks. I think I opened that book up, even it was like falling apart. It was worse than a copy I sent to you. I mean, it was like, I don't know what happened to it. It was like mummified,
Lived a rough
and
life.
it had a very, very rough life. That Ghost Rider was that was city mileage. That was a lot of wear and tear on that book, and I read it and I loved it, and the high was so strong from finally acquiring that book, and then, whereas like fast forward to maybe a couple months ago, I could buy a book off the. I bought a copy of like 6 months ago. I bought a copy of FF 49, and I was happy for like 15 minutes.
And that's like a
So
that's like a big book. So
yeah, and I was like pumped for like 15 minutes, and then I was like, well, that was stupid. That was dumb.
I don't know if you saw a couple of the highlights, like comments I highlighted, but Sammy said she was the same way with makeup, and Ernie says I'm the same way with art supplies. So reinforcing your point that it's everyone has their thing. And then John said I legitimately jumped on live with Rod an hour ago just because I was feeling down and knew talking comics with friends would make me feel better. Thankfully, he was around to join in. Yeah, and that's something we touched on a little bit before the show too, is that, Chris said that, his favorite part of this whole thing now is the people that he knows and has met through comics. But you don't need to buy comics all the time to have a relationship with those people anymore.
Yeah, and I really find that the people that I like the most, the people that I spend the most time talking to, most of the time I feel like we're not even talking about comic books anymore. I feel like we talk about what's going on with life and what's going on with family and other important things, and comics is sort of like maybe thrown in there, like did you buy that book or did you read that story, but it's no longer like the focus because you develop real friendships with people. And so I could never buy another comic book again. And I think I'd still be friends with the majority of people that I've come to be friends with, within the comic community.
Yeah. And I think, that's common interests are the thing that always kind of brings people together, but it's not what keeps people together.
Very true.
Ernie says, comics helped me when I was deployed in Bosnia and Iraq. It took me away from where I was and took me away home. So yeah, I mean, obviously comics are really powerful for a lot of people in a lot of different ways. And myself and Chris included, like, we wouldn't still be here talking about them and collecting them if they weren't. John says, sex is what keeps people together. Thanks, John.
Thanks for that addition. Well, we talked about in episode 1 and 2 of Comics and Therapy about the escapism that comes from comic books, and also about how stories in comic books can tie us, can feel very personal. That's why we talked about Mr. Miracle in episodes 1 and 2, because we had so many issues, not issues, but we had so many things in common with things that were brought up in those issues. I don't know if you could see the poster behind me is the splash page from issue 1 of Mr. Miracle when he's laying on the floor in his bathroom after he's just slit his wrist, which is, maybe not the nicest image to put in your living room behind your couch for visitors, but obviously there's a connection there with comic books that I find that's deeply, deeply personal. But that's not every comic book, that's the problem. Like, I read Mr. Miracle, and that was 12 issues of comic book that was so deeply personal to me. And then I read, now I sit and I read Venom or, Dead Man Logan or Old Man Quill, and they're entertaining, but there's nothing valuable to me in those books anymore, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, they are kind of they're passing entertainment. It's not something that is. And I don't know if it's because things like Mr. Miracle have given you perspective on what comic stories can do for you, but clearly not everything is going to be able to be so personal and so connected. But it's the question of, I have felt connected to stories that I don't have a personal connection with, just because I've enjoyed the creativity so much, or whatever the case may be, or the art, or the storytelling, or Chris Barrett says, I read a Spider-Man comic and I can relate and feel to what Peter is going through. I mean, maybe not exactly, but I get your point of, like, most comics have something in them, or not most, but like most good comics have something in them that is generally like universal, I guess. Maybe not universal, but relatable. Because not everything's going to touch that home base for everyone, but things a little more subtle than Mr. Miracle can still have a connection with people and can have. But yeah, Mr. Miracle is definitely next level as far as like reading it and saying like, oh yes, I can identify with the themes here, and I can identify directly with what he's feeling, and maybe not to the point of where he goes for me, but um, you know, the anxiety and the depression and all of those things surrounding that for certain.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I didn't mean it so much in that every book has to be like that level of personal. I just mean it in terms of, like you said, it was a good word to use, relatable. I think that when storylines just have some sort of, ability to be relatable to the reader in any way, it's not going to be every reader that's going to find it relatable every story. Not all of us are going to pick up Spider-Man and feel like we can relate to Peter Parker. But if a lot of people can, or a decent number of people can, then maybe that makes it a good comic book. I just find, like, for me personally, lately especially, I don't find that anymore. So like you said, with the high from buying the comic books, that it's like that pop and it's like fleeting, and I kind of feel like I'm still chasing the high of like the couple good stories that I've read in the past year, and Mr. Miracle being one of them. Obviously, unlike most people, I was a fan of Heroes in Crisis, but those books have certain similarities to them that I'm at a point where I could probably read anything by Tom King and feel like I enjoy it, but I know not everybody is on that same boat.
Yeah, right. And he, Good as Gold says, almost all DC characters right now are dealing with parenthood. They know their base. That's a interesting point. I never really thought about that. Is that they know they have an older crowd who are kids who are my age who grew up reading comics and now have children. I don't, but um, you do, and
Yeah.
so that's definitely something that young. I don't see young people reading DC books. I see more young people reading Marvel
No.
books.
I feel like the age group in the comic book shop in general is like weird, man. I feel like it's that like late 20s to like 40s range is like where comic book readers are at every time I go into the shop, and I feel like I don't see too many people in their like teens or early 20s anymore, even in the shop when I'm in there. And maybe that's just the times that I go, but it just feels like comic books are like an old man's game right now.
Yeah, for sure.
To me, at least. I could totally be wrong, but just from when I go into shops and the people that I interact with, it seems like a crowd is more like our age and above, and it's odd. It feels odd.
Yeah, makes you wonder where the industry is going if they're kind of like we're going to be getting older and dying out. Couldn't John says, couldn't you argue the meaningful parts of life come from chasing the occasional and chasing and occasionally catching a high from something that it isn't toxic but rather positive in some way? Yeah, and I think so. And it's a good point to say that. Um, there's certainly some negative things to what I was talking about, where I kind of spend too much money sometimes on comics where I shouldn't because I'm looking for that high that I'm chasing. But yeah, at the end of the day, like it's not something that's harming me because worst case scenario, I can resell some of those books. Maybe not everything that I paid for them, but they hold some value, hopefully. And Chad said that he just found out he's having a son. So congratulations, 90 MF Comics.
Congratulations. Y2 Crybaby's about to have a crybaby.
A literal crybaby.
A literal crybaby. Keep you up at night.
Chris Barrett says YouTube is now 180. That's very funny.
YouTube is going to be MIA changing diapers. That's what it's going to be.
So, yeah, it at the end of the day, like that's kind of the point I was going to be making, is that there are negative aspects to using comics as a way to kind of manage things with yourself mentally, if that's what you're doing with them, which I definitely am aware that I do sometimes. Sometimes it's not necessarily the only reason I collect comics. But yeah, I mean, it's not, I don't see it as like a harmful thing. Maybe I'm being biased though.
I think I understand like where you and John are coming from and saying that there are much worse ways to chase a high, specifically when we talk about it like that, if you're using drugs and alcohol, or you're gambling, or you're doing some of these other things that are considered, really toxic and really, bad behaviors in order to feel better or be social, or, just help yourself out of a funk, then obviously those are, anything's better than those, so so to compare collecting comics in that sense to, alcoholism or drug use and abuse is,
Right.
well, that's
Clearly.
definitely not the same thing. But if you're collecting comics and buying comics to feel better, and you're putting yourself in the doghouse for it, like if collecting comics and being on YouTube is hurting your personal relationships in real life, if reading comic books, spending money on comic books, or being on YouTube is hurting you in a relationship that you're in, or hurting you in being a parent or a sibling or a son or a daughter, if buying and spending money on comics is putting you into debt because you're putting these books on credit cards and stuff to try to make yourself feel better, or to try to show off for
Connection
Instagram,
issues.
then that's when. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're back.
Oh, where did I get cut off?
I mean, you were saying that, it's when it's affecting your relationships, that's when it's a problem. It's basically, I think, where you're going with it, right?
Yeah, if it's affecting your relationships, or if it's affecting, you're putting yourself into debt in order to buy comic books to feel better, then that becomes, those are some pretty serious negatives to collecting.
Yeah, and I think the other side of that is that if you are using it as an answer, and you're not actually addressing your issues, but you're just trying to kind of, I guess, cover them up, or like address them by doing something that isn't really addressing them, but you're saying, well, I feel good enough by doing this. That's not helping either. Like, you need to actually like address your mental health issues if you are having them, rather than do something that is just like, okay, well, this is making me feel better in the moment, so I'm not going to go to therapy, or I'm not going to take an antidepressant, or whatever the case may be.
Right. I think that's like definitely the important factor here, is that I know we call the show Comics as Therapy, but comics are not therapy. Therapy is therapy.
Yeah.
Therapy is therapy. Getting actual help when you're struggling, getting help if you're in a relationship where you're struggling. That's important. You need to have things that you enjoy in life. And if comics are something you enjoy in life, then I support that 100%. But it can't be as like a mask. It can't be as like, I had a really crappy day, so rather than address any of the issues in my life, I'm going to go read a comic and escape, and it's going to make me feel better. Because it's not going to make you feel better. It's just going to mask what it is that made you feel like crap in the first place.
It's going to distract you for that 15, 20 minutes. But then when you get back to it, when you close that comic and put it back in the bag, like, your mind's just going to go right back to where it was.
And all your real world problems still exist after the comic books have come and gone, And like I said, if you're letting your comic books create more real world problems, my comic books, partially my comic books created real world problems for me, because the second that I would put my daughter down to bed, I would disappear into my room with my comic books, and I would shut myself out from the world other than the comic book world. And that wasn't a healthy way for me to address what I was going through. And that wasn't a healthy way for me to deal with people in my life. And so I pushed people away. And so when I say comics can have a negative effect, I think you have to have ownership of your own behavior, and you have to really take into account, like, are you enjoying comic books in a healthy way, or are you allowing them to be another factor in living unhealthily?
Sure. And
If that makes sense.
going back to John's point a little bit, and I know it's not comparable, but you could replace comics in that sentence with alcohol, because your people who overuse alcohol are using it for a very similar reason as to what we're describing here. It's a way to escape. It's
Absolutely.
a way to ignore what's happening and make yourself feel better for a temporary amount of time. And that's clearly more damaging to yourself and others, or can be certainly, than something like comic books. So that's why I'm kind of hesitant to compare them. But at the same time, if you can find it, it's about moderation. But if you can find that help that you need in something like comic books rather than drugs or alcohol, clearly it's. There you go. Knight's Hold says anything's a problem when you do something over and over that prevents you from doing other things you want to do with life. Absolutely. Like if you use something as a distraction, like I was talking about with Chris before we went on air about, earlier in this year when I was at my lowest point, and, I would not do the dishes for a few days, or I wouldn't do laundry, or whatever, or I wouldn't cook dinner. I would get a takeout pizza instead, or I would eat cereal or something, because I was so wrapped up in sitting with my comic books instead, because that made me feel better than those other things. That's not great. That's not a way to get healthy.
No. And then we talked about too before the show, I mean, that's part of what we said, is that I'm sort of in the opposite end of that boat, where right now I don't get any joy from my comic books. I'm at a point right now where I'm not picking up new books on Wednesday, and I'm not reading any of my books. And when I'm feeling crappy, the last thing in the world that I want to do is open up a box and read a comic. I just don't care right now. They just don't have right now any value for me. So it's a weird place to find myself, where something that used to be very important to me and used to bring me a lot of joy now brings me zero joy, and is just an eyesore to me to have to look at them all day.
Yeah. And so Caleb says a crutch is a crutch. People can make anything a bad habit. And Chris Barrett said,
True.
What Alec just described was a low. I call it an average Tuesday. I hate doing laundry. Yeah, I don't like doing laundry either. I'm not saying that. It's something I look forward to beforehand. So, yeah, I mean, and I've certainly gotten to those points before in my collection as well, where I say, like, why do I have all this stuff? It's just in the way. It's huge amount of space. It's a huge amount of literal and metaphorical weight. So Good as Gold asks a good question. Is there an end game for your collection? Do you have a goal? If you reach, would you be satisfied? I mean, I think the clear answer to that is no. I've gotten, most of my major Grail books that I've ever wanted, and I still am buying comics like at a rate that I never have before. So I can't say that I would ever be satisfied, which is a scary thing to think about.
And on the flip side, I'm at a point where I'm thinking about getting rid of every single comic book that I own. So, that would be an end game to my collecting, to get rid of all my comic books.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a different end game, right? It's not like, oh, I've gotten everything I need, so my collection is complete, or it's like an end game, whereas I'm done with comics, and so now they are exiting my life.
Yeah. Hugely different sides of the spectrum that we're talking about here.
And And then, you know, some people get to the point where they're like, well, I have all the books I want. Now I want to get them all graded. So then that becomes a
Yeah,
different.
I don't think there's ever a finish line for a collector of any kind.
Yeah, unless you're just
There's
like,
always like a next step.
even if you're like, you know, someone who's like, I only want to collect a full run of Uncanny X-Men. That's my goal. And I only buy Uncanny X-Men books. Once you finish with that, you're going to look for the next title you want to buy, because like the satisfaction is completing the collection or finding books that help you fill runs or whatever. It's not necessarily Uncanny X-Men.
Right. Or like you said, it's like, oh, now I'm going to get all the keys graded. And then once I get them graded, I want to get a higher grade. You know, I've been in that boat with books where I had a book and then I wanted it in a higher grade. And then it's like, now I've had 4 copies of one book because I kept upgrading. Like, well, where was the purpose in that at the end of the day?
And I said try not to think in black and white, because it means you're still caught up. And you mean selling all or buying all. Yeah, I mean, I think if you like sell off your whole collection, I don't know if necessarily you're still caught up in the world of.
I think I'm
I don't.
kind of in a boat where I feel like over it a little bit. Not in the sense of like over comic books. I just think that, you know, part of what we talked about before we started the show that Alec brought up was that I enjoy all of the people that I met and interacting with them, and then the storylines and stuff like that that I enjoy reading. You know, so much of this stuff can be read digitally, so I can still enjoy comic books without having to be wrapped up in the stress that I put on myself to stay on top of books, to know what's coming out every week, to go every Wednesday and buy comics. To me, that reached a point where it's not sustainable. And so rather than drive myself crazy and really dislike comic books, I find it would maybe be more helpful for me to get rid of the clutter and kind of start fresh from scratch. And that doesn't mean I won't ever collect comic books again, but I think it means that right now, um, you know, I think I'm on a very long break.
Yeah, and another thing I've been thinking about is, you know, the difficulty comes in selling some of the bigger books and some of the better things, or like buying better books and bigger books, is that I know that I put some self-worth into what my collection is. Like it is something that I can look at and point to and say like, oh look, see, I have something that makes me more worthwhile because I have a giant size X-Men one, or I have this book, or I have that book. And it kind of is this connection to my self-worth, which is ridiculous. I know, because if I did what you're talking about and just sold everything I own tomorrow, everyone I know I don't think would think less of me if I did that. Like I would still have the relationships I have. That's not connected to what books I own. But at the same time, like I can't help that feeling.
Right. I think that's natural. I think that's human. I think any of us who do this collecting, we have that feeling too of like how hard we worked for our books or what we think our collection is worth. But you know, everyone reaches that point. If you've ever been in your comic book shop when someone comes in looking to sell a collection or looking to sell a box of comics and is like, I got these comics, they're worth $5,000. And then you watch the look on their face when, you know, the person at the store offers them $500 or something. It's
Yeah.
like, because they did that, they attached their worth and their hard work and their effort to that box of paper. And at the end of the day, man, listen, I used to say this about my job. It was something that they always said about my job, and I say it now about a lot of other things in life that I attach unnecessary importance to. You, no matter how much you love comic books, they are never going to love you back.
That's what you think. No, obviously that's true.
But you know, that's the point of what I'm trying to say, is that I'm not saying that comics don't have importance. I'm not saying they don't have importance to me. They have huge importance to me. I'm just saying right now my comic books are not a priority in my life, and therefore if I can get rid of them and help address some of the things that are priorities, then that has to be what's most important in my life.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, if comics become something that is standing in your way, if they're a wall to your current mental health situation, not you specifically, I mean the royal you, if one is using comics as a way to kind of not deal with the issues they're dealing with, that's when they're a problem. And looks like you're trying to read Sammy's comment right now. It says, when I get severely depressed, I feel empty and nothing brings me joy. Instead, things that brought me joy cause me more anxiety. Sounds like that's the point you're at, Chris.
And I just read that, and I was going to say when you were done that's pretty spot on. So absolutely true.
And I've been there as well. Like I told you during my moving process, there were points where I was just like, just throw everything away. I don't care. And I did throw a lot of stuff away. I didn't throw comics away, but I threw a lot of stuff away. I sold a lot of stuff that I wouldn't have probably sold otherwise, because it was just bringing me anxiety to think about those things. But am I going to regret it down the line? I don't know. I mean, did I lose money? Probably. Is that important? I don't know.
I think probably not. I think at the end of the day, the gist of any kind of conversation that you and I have, especially when we do these shows, is that you have to make decisions in life that bring you peace. Whatever that peace is going to be independent to you. But I think you have to make decisions that are going to bring you peace. If comic books bring you peace, then I want you to buy as many comic books as you can possibly buy. And if comic books don't bring you peace, then I don't want you to buy a single one. That's what this all boils down to, is that as a community, as a group of people, as people who are friends with each other, I think that supporting each other is primary and comic books are secondary. And it doesn't matter if you buy 0 books on Wednesday or if you buy 100 books on Wednesday, you're still going to be a valuable member of the community for what you bring as a person, not what you bring in terms of how many short boxes or what your collection is valued at.
Right. And to your point that we kind of talked about this off air a little bit, is that you fall into this kind of, I don't want to say trap, but this habit of buying books every Wednesday and feeling the need to do that and look at the list of what's coming out and make sure you're getting all the stuff that's going to be hot or all the stuff that you want or whatever you're going after each week. And when is there a point when you do that, or you're doing that, where it's just because it's what you're used to, and it's not what you want to do anymore? And I feel like that's kind of the question you brought up to yourself, is like, are you doing it because you still really want to do it, or are you doing it because you're just in the habit of doing it and it's what you feel like you need to do each week?
Yeah, I feel like part of me feels like it's become such a pattern that, when you're struggling, and this is like, you kind of said it yourself, that like right now you have a lot of free time. And so too much free time is it's poisonous, because without structure, without having something valuable to do with ourselves, we lose track and we lose sight of what our goals are and what it is that we're trying to accomplish. And so for me, part of Wednesday was the feeling of stability with the structure of, I knew what I was doing every Wednesday. Every Wednesday I was waking up and I was going straight to the comic store, and I was having my daily, not my daily, but I was having my weekly Wednesday conversation with the shop owners at the 2 shops that I like to go to. And I was going from one shop to the other shop, and I was getting all my books, and then I was going to work, and then I was like taking pictures of all my books, and then I was spending time making videos of all my. Wednesday was such a structured day, and it was such an enjoyable day. But then I reached a point where it stopped being enjoyable and it started feeling like a second job,
Or
where
chore.
like I enjoy going. Yeah, and like you know what, I'm so blessed, and I know I say this all the time, but the two owners of the shops that I go to are like the most down to earth, coolest guys in the world, and I can go there and talk to them without buying a single book. And I think I lost sight of that. Like in my mind, I felt like I had to go there and spend money to be able to talk to people about comic books, and I realized that that's not true either, that I can go in there and buy no comic books or one comic book and still have that good conversation and the social aspect that I think is so important.
Yeah, and it is like a good comic shop on a Wednesday is like a social club because you go and you see the same faces and you know you're going to run into the same people and you can shoot the breeze for a while, even if it's not about comics. And like you said, the better relationships you form, it turns into not talking about comics. It turns into talking about other stuff. Um, and I think the comic shop is just a building at a point for stuff like that, at least. Um, but I've gone years where I went to shops where I didn't even have that, and it's part of the reason why I started on YouTube is because the shop I was going to didn't provide that for me. So um, I was looking for another way to kind of get that social interaction around comic books, and YouTube has been great, and I've met some tremendous friends and some tremendous people through it. But it definitely is something that has pushed me to buy more than I would normally, for sure.
Yeah, I think Instagram and YouTube are really good at getting people to spend more money. I think that you see it's the same thing as everybody else, right? If you're a girl that's looking at IG and you think that you have to buy certain clothes or makeup, if you're a guy that's on IG and you think you have to buy certain sneakers or you have to look a certain way or you have to go on certain vacations or eat at certain restaurants, I think if you're following people on IG and looking at comic books, you start to feel this like push that you have to get all the new books too, or you have to have that hot comic that's hard to find, or you have to get that big wall book that everyone else is after because that's the name of the game and we're all playing this like competition. And I
Yeah.
think but that's why I said earlier, if you're collecting for the purposes of like showing off and it's putting you into debt, then you need to reevaluate what you're doing, because that's not going to be healthy for you in the long run,
Yeah,
and
it's
that's
not
going to
really.
create a ton of more problems.
Yeah, and I'm not at the point where it's putting me into debt, but I'm at the point where it's like making me raise an eyebrow at the end of the week, where I'm like, oh damn, um, that's how much I spent this week. Just kind of like looking back on it and saying like, okay. And every week I'm like, oh, okay, I need to slow down a little bit. And then each next week I'm like, well, I got nothing to do today. Maybe I'll hit up a shop. Um,
Yeah, it's dangerous, man.
yeah. So I need to figure out a way
But
to.
but if there's but if there's an underlying issue there in why you're spending money, then even if you stopped buying comic books, you would find something else to replace it with. That's
Right.
the reality. You would turn around and say, "Well, I'm not going to buy any comic books this week," and then you'd buy like four new T-shirts that you for some band that you like,
Right.
and you'd
Or
spend the
or
same amount of money.
or video games or something that is you know dumping a ton of money into an iPhone game or something that you're never going to see again. Like that money's just gone.
Yeah, and I used to do all those things. I used to buy a new Xbox game every week when I wasn't buying comic books. I used to buy a pair of sneakers every paycheck. Like I've been a retail therapy guy my entire life, so it's not anything new for me to use comics as partially as that purpose. But like you said, and like we've said, addressing those underlying issues behind it are so phenomenally important to maybe finding joy in hobbies again rather than feeling inclined to do it just out of necessity or pattern.
Perry Comics says 9 years of World of Warcraft. Yeah, I've been there too. And since you can't see the chat, 90 MF Comics says promoter 90 here. Chris, if you're free for Sunday night slab down this Sunday, I think we need to see some bloody covers.
Oh man. All right. I might be available. I don't know. But
and Chris,
we'll see.
Chris Barrett is battling me in the chat against my protest for people to send me super chats. He said, remember, you can send Alec money now. And I said, please don't. And he said, if the nice people want to send you money, let them.
Were you officially verified yet? You can get super chats?
Oh yeah. Yep. I get super chats, and I made like a whole 74 cents my first week after being monetized. So,
I would have sent, if I was in the chat, I would have sent you money already. I was Tony Sanders' first super chat.
Bueller was my first super chat.
Well,
I'm glad you're not in the chat, because you shouldn't be sending me money. Especially
it would have only been like 99 cents.
Well, so we're doing this thing, John and I, on Book Club now, where if we're doing it on my channel, since I'm now monetized, we're doing the donations to literacy campaigns, and we made like $30 our first week, which is pretty cool. I'm sure it's not going to stay at that rate, because I think people were kind of excited to use that super chat button, because that was like the first time it went live. But I mean, the thing that kind of stinks is that Google takes 30%. So especially when it's coming to me, who cares? But DS Comics just joined. What's up?
Can you tell people just to PayPal you instead?
Yeah, that's what Kavi ended up doing. He's like, hey, here's a super chat, but check your PayPal, because he was like, he sent like 99 cents through super chat, but sent me like, $10 or something through PayPal, which was cool. So anyway, Kachung says at least pet lizards are free in Florida. Yep. I've got a couple.
Did you ever find that one that was running around your apartment?
I found a second one. It definitely, maybe definitely wasn't a second one. It could have been the same one, but it was days later. So I assume the first one had died or it escaped, because I've not seen it. So I'm either going to find a little husk of a lizard at some point, or it scurried outside somehow, the way it got in.
They just hang out in there, watch you sleeping.
Yeah, probably.
Creepy lizards.
They're funny, man. There's all sorts of like different colors, and like some are huge, some are super tiny. Lizards, man.
That's
Chris Barrett said you have 2 lizards making baby lizards. And
yeah.
Sammy says they can stay alive for a while in your house. Cool. So it's probably still around somewhere. So, we said we were going to try to stick to about an hour on this. We're at about 50 minutes so far.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, but it's kind of like what I wanted to touch on, what I had on my mind. And I feel like you kind of touched on a lot of stuff we talked about beforehand. Is there anything else you want to bring up before we?
No, I think I covered most of it. I think I feel pretty good about what I got off my chest here today.
Yeah, it always helps to kind of like air out these thoughts and get someone else's perspective and say like, either yes, I'm right in thinking this way, or here's the other side of the coin, or even just like, sometimes just talking about stuff out loud, it makes you realize either how right you are, how ridiculous you're being. So,
are you saying that I'm being ridiculous? Is that
no?
What
I'm saying I'm being ridiculous. I'm pointing the finger at myself. Good as Gold said. Thank you for your words, gentlemen. Really hits home. You're welcome. We hope to. Pope Service says Google finds a way to drink all of your milkshake. There will be blood style. They extend that straw. Comic Books NYC said this was like a Festivus airing of grievances for collecting. Just kidding. Love you guys.
Festivus for the rest of us.
Festivus for the rest of us. You know it. So yeah, I mean, obviously, if any of you guys want to talk about this further, hit me up on Instagram. I'm not gonna extend that same offer for Chris.
Oh, thanks.
I wasn't going to plug this on this show, but DS Comics says, when are you having another auction? I'm actually having one this Sunday. I was going to post the thumbnail I made this evening on Instagram. So keep an eye out. We got a good little crew for that, and should be a fun time. A lot more fun than this show. I mean, fun in a different way. I think this is still fun.
It's a different kind of fun. It's like sad fun. If anyone wants to come to my apartment and dig through my boxes, some of my comics are for sale. It'll be like a party. Bring a veggie tray.
Carrots and ranch. Thierry asked, are you selling my book at White Label? No, I'm not. Don't worry. You still have first dibs on that. Cool. Well, thanks for joining me, man. It's always a pleasure to get together and talk about this or any other thing. We should we should do a cheerful show sometime.
We should. Well, I haven't been on book club in a while. It's always a cheerful show. I'd be down for a book club at some point.
We did Usagi somewhat recently, about, what was that, 6 weeks ago now? 2 months?
Yeah, that was a while, 2 months.
And John wasn't there. So I feel like
that's why it was cheery.
Yeah. Boy. Yeah, we'll definitely have you on book club again soon. We got to find something cool to have you on for. Thanks for everyone in the chat for stopping by. And Perry Comics says issue 3 next week. You guys hooked me. So I assume he's talking about Usagi. Yeah, thanks for everyone for joining and listening to us whine or complain or air our grievances, Festivus style, however you want to see it, or just share some insight, maybe. We'll put it that way. Terry says, love these types of talks. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining. Thanks, Chris. Always a pleasure. And we'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.